Hey, welcome to my channel. I am Dr. Shareece. I help Black men and women heal from trauma and toxic relationships. And today we're going to be talking about toxic fathers, signs you had or have a toxic father. I think I'm going to be talking about it more as like a type of man, right? Versus explicit signs, because I feel like the specifics of it can show up so differently just depending on what type of man and childhood experiences that he had. Number one on my list is untreated mental health issues. My father had untreated mental health. He has delusions, and it created definitely a toxic environment growing up when it came to a point where he was not able to function, father, in a way that was healthy. There's so many different types of mental illness, and the severity of them can also depend, right, on what the experience was or what your genetics are. There's alcoholism, there's bipolar, there's schizophrenia. Like there's so many issues. What about major depressive disorder? There's so many things a person can go through. But if a father is not dealing with his own issues, that's really the hallmark of him being toxic and not being able to be present in the lives of his children. So in my case, it was like, like religiosity, delusions, and a lot of control in terms of like where we could go and who we could be around. All of that toxic. But there's other signs, right? I consider this to be a more extreme form of toxicity that probably goes more towards like neglect and abuse. And so if you were neglected or abused, you definitely had a toxic parent. But there's so many other, I think, subtle factors, right? You might be thinking in your head about the specifics that your father did or his own experience with anxiety that was left untreated. It's not as extreme as I think my father, but that impacted the way he was able to show up for you. The next one on my list is unhealed childhood trauma. So no mental health issues, not in particular, but a lot of trauma that impacts the decisions that are being made. So people show up trauma in a lot of different ways. I was just talking to one of my clients about describing two sides of the same coin. Siblings can exist in a household and experience the same trauma. It's not the same, but can experience the same parent that shows up in a different way. And you, because you also come into this world in a different way from your sibling, the interaction, right? The fit between the child and the parent also determines like your ideas about life, how you make decisions, how you feel about yourself, what your self-esteem is going to be like. There's some kids who come in really, really hardy and are ready to take on like life's challenges. And then there's some kids that come in really, really sensitive. And so you both have the same toxic parent, right? A toxic father who, is fearing for whatever in his life or has low self-worth. And so it might show up in like a very aggressive way in the home where you feel unsteady. But you may not be so affected by your toxic father if you have come into this world like ready to take on and find resources and do the things. It doesn't stop the fact that a man who has not dealt with his past is just not safe, right? Doesn't create a sort of safe environment for kids to flourish and be loved well. It's just unpredictable. One of the important things about masculinity, when we talk about divine masculinity, it's sort of that predictability, that stability that men can offer their families. And then related but separate, I have a few points here. Let me read them off. I think they're all describing one type of father, but maybe he doesn't have mental health problems, maybe he doesn't have trauma, but he has a worldview. Like he has a more authoritarian parenting style, like a drill master. Maybe he was in the army. There could be so many reasons why a father might be like this. Controlling, overprotective, very strict rules, no freedom, right? Children grow up in this home and they feel smothered, right? They can feel claustrophobic. These are the kids that once they escape, right, they might view turning 18 and being able to be on their own as a sort of escape and going into freedom. And those kids often rebel, right? Whether it's during the teenage years or in their early 20s, they usually find stuff that they should not be finding, usually get into some kind of trouble, whether it's financial or some sort of drug use, because they've been sheltered so much and coddled, and not coddled, that's not the right word, sheltered and overprotected, that they have no real understanding of what the world is and what untrustworthy people are like. They don't have a real sense of how they need to show up in the world and how they should have boundaries or respond to people, because they were never really allowed to create their own boundaries. The boundaries were rigidly instructed for them up until the time, usually when they turn 18 and leave. And it's usually fathers that are this overprotective. It might be coming from a place of worry or anxiety, but a lot of it, I think, when we think about spirituality, a lot of it is to try to maintain control over the unpredictable, the unknown of the world that we live in. And when people view their children as extensions of themselves versus autonomous beings that you're guiding through in this life, they have a tendency to want to control every minor detail that they do. These are the micromanagers at work. They also treat their kids in a similar way. And so a father who won't let his daughter date, who has very strict rules for how his son can be successful, like what kind of job would be approved or career he would approve of. Like there's just a lot of people pleasing that also tends to go into a father who is this controlling. Either that or the kid rebels, right? And then is so afraid of disappointing the father. And then the last one on my list is abusive. And so there's so many ways for a father to be abusive: verbally, physically, financially, emotionally. He can also engage in domestic violence towards the mother of the kids. It is illegal. It's illegal to fight in front of kids. And that's because of the severe impact that witnessing violence can have on kids. That's one of the things. Your kids can be removed if repeatedly Deepax is being called to separate you two or provide a safe environment for your kids. So a father that is abusive can be subtly, can be chronic, can be overt. There's so many ways that a man can show up in a home. Just his presence, maybe just the look, right? Because kids often tend to respond more quickly in terms of like doing what they're told to masculinity than they do to femininity. There's a commanding presence that men who are very masculine tend to have. And so if that is part of a toxic masculinity and you are physically violent or severely punishing kids, and there's so many different ways to punish kids. Like, I know there's a lot of talk about spanking, right? But there are like some psychological tortures that parents can do to their kids that are just as harmful, right? Like the sitting on rice or holding your hand in the ear or having a book. Some of these things you may not be aware of if you didn't have like a toxic father or a parenting style that was very, very punitive. But I've worked with kids for years, right? And I've heard horror stories of the kind of abuse that a kid can go through, and the sick minds of some parents who really have no business having kids, but somehow have like 5 or 8 of them, that can lead to such low self-esteem in their kids, blaming self, so much shame and guilt being experienced by the child because you want to love your parent, right? We're taught to love our parents, and this is the person that brings me into this world. And being around a father who started to know you before you even knew words or knew yourself can be extremely difficult for kids to go through. Just the overall toxic masculinity of men not valuing women or girls, having favorites that because they're the boy, I also think contributes to like being a toxic father, really not giving space and giving a lot of restrictions to girls because they're a girl, can be quite unhealthy and then lead to internalized misogyny for girls. I think that's it. I'm not sure any of these really exists in isolation, right? When you think of somebody like Diddy, who I definitely think has different views on boys and girls, doesn't value girls or women. He's probably the epitome of toxicity in like all the ways, and abusive, and just all the things. So if you need like a severe example, I would say Diddy is one. But there's so many fathers that, and I haven't gotten into like the severe, when we start talking about incest and that kind of stuff, there's so many fathers that overall do not create a safe space for their kids. Someone left a comment about not protecting kids from family members or friends, like ignoring important things that are happening, not caring about the opinion of the child. There's like so many things. So if you have any others, leave them in the comments. We can have a discussion about them. I can also do another version of this video. I do have a part 2 that I'm going to do that it's just describing a very different man and he's toxic in a very different way. So stay tuned for that video. If you enjoyed this one, give this video a like, subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Share this video with someone you think needs to like wake up, like, oh, need to understand toxic fathers a little bit more. And thank you for watching.